Welcome to the Ag Policy Podcast. I'm Josh Baethge. I cover food and agriculture policy for Farm Progress in the U.S. And joining me today is Maximo Torero, the Chief Economist for the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. Thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
No, a pleasure. Very well. Thank you so much.
Now, for those who aren't necessarily familiar with the FAO at the UN, can you tell us just a little bit briefly about what you and the organization does?
Yeah, of course. FAO is a specialized agency on food and agriculture. It's part of the UN, but as a specialized agency, it has its own membership. We have a significant number of countries, 194 countries as members. Our job is to assure food security and nutrition in the world and work both in the food and in the agricultural sector. We have a strategic framework which is based in four betters: better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life, leaving one behind, which essentially tries to bring improvements in production, but producing more nutritious food, bigger access to healthy diets, that's better nutrition, and doing it sustainable for today and tomorrow, that's better environment, and trying to bring even the people which are in unaffordable conditions part of this, that's the better life. So social protection programs, emergency work, and several of our initiatives focus on better life.
One of the reasons that the main reason I wanted to have you on today is to talk a little bit about how the conflict in Iran and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has impacted global agriculture and global food security. I know just in the past week, you've made a couple of statements about if this crisis is not addressed soon, within the next 6 to 12 months, we're facing an even greater catastrophe. Can you give us a sense of how dire the situation is for global food security and for?
Look, yeah, sure. The situation is complicated because since the Strait of Hormuz has been closed, we have basically removed out of the world between 1/4 to 1/5 of the inputs, key inputs for agriculture. Oil, 35% go through the Strait of Hormuz, natural gas, 20%, fertilizers between 20 to 30%, and sulfur, 50%. Sulfur is used to create phosphates, sulfuric acid to dilute and to create phosphates, natural gas to create nitrogen. And also, the Gulf countries were a big importers of food, and they also disappeared. So that's a demand side. So you have a supply choke and a demand side. Now, what else happens is to produce seeds, you need fertilizers because hybrid seeds require a lot of nitrogen. And those are also being affected. And therefore, all the input prices that are relevant for the agri-food system are being impacted. Fertilizer, energy, seeds, and energy for irrigation because it's mostly done by diesel. So as a result of this, farmers will have to make tough choices because prices today are low. And with this increasing costs, they are going into red, they are going into deficits. And their choices can be to produce the same with less inputs, therefore lower yields, to produce less or not to produce, or to shift to commodities that require less nitrogen, like moving from corn and wheat towards soybeans, for example. And the consequence, if this is not resolved, we put a red light in 90 days because of the crop calendars in the world, is that we will have lower yields, less production, higher prices of commodities, and food inflation, which could create significant consequence to the society. So just to put in context, right now the increase in crude oil is 55%. The increase in natural gas goes between 60 to 85%, depending on the region. Urea prices has increased between 25 to 55. Urea is nitrogenous fertilizer. The freight cost has increased 43%, and the bunker fuel cost 58%. So all the different inputs are being impacted. We are not yet seeing that in the commodity prices because today we still have enough supplies and stocks. But we will see this soon in the following months as we keep moving towards the next season, and especially in 2027.
Sure. So give us an idea, like looking across the globe. You talk about going into the next growing season. Where are you most concerned at first, as far as being severely impacted going into the next growing season? Are we talking, India, Australia? I'm curious which nations you see will be impacted most severely first.
Yeah, look, this is a combination of how much dependency we had with imports of fertilizers from the Gulf with the crop calendar, and also looking at the demand side, no, because there was a big demand. So in the beginning of this crisis, which today is in day 83, if I'm not incorrect, the major countries that we flagged were Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka in Asia, South Asia. Bangladesh because rice and they need a lot of fertilizers and they were in the planting season. India the same, Pakistan the same, Sri Lanka the same. You have seen all the measures being put by India right now, extremely tough measures. In East Africa, Sudan, Kenya, and Somalia, all of them significantly import dependent of this region and also in their crop calendar. In the Middle East, Turkey and Jordan, and then also Brazil because Brazil imports 46% of urea from this region and Thailand. The situation now has even go deeper, so it's not only those countries, but there are many other countries already because we are getting close to 90 days, which means our crop calendars are going to be touched. So for example, if we focus on Africa, Angola imports 79.5% of natural gas from this region, which is used for production of nitrogen. We have the Djibouti imports 99.8% of that from this region. We have Ethiopia, 100% of crude oil comes from this region, 41% of urea, 100% of natural gas. You have Kenya, 84% of urea, 80.8% of DAP. You have Malawi, 100% of DAP, and so on and so forth. So Somalia, 98% of urea. So many countries are being impacted because of import dependency. But the other thing that we need to understand is that these are international prices. So it's not just the countries which are import dependent. Any country, no matter you produce your own, you will pay a higher price because all these commodities. So for example, I can be a big producer in the US, but somebody from Asia could buy from the US at a higher price, and therefore the US farmer has to pay that higher price. So these are global market prices. These are not localized prices.
Sure. And I know the FAO put out some recommendations you think countries need to start taking now to prepare for the long-term impacts of this crisis. Can you go over some of the key points on that you think actions countries need to take to ensure some of these crisis situations don't happen?
Sure. And the idea of the recommendations is because now, as I said, we are close to the 90-day number 83. So it's time to start to think how we can minimize the impact. No, it's no longer the expectation that this will open because no matter it opens tomorrow, the impacts will be there. The issue could be the intensity of the impact, especially on energy prices, but on food, most of the decisions for the next planting season are taken. So it could be for 2027, could benefit. But right now, it's time to think on how we can reduce impact. So we have split our recommendations in 3 blocks: short term, 0 to 90 days, medium term, 90 to 360 days, and then longer term, bigger than 360. So in the short term, first is we need to find any alternative route or supply that is available. And here we are referring to marginal improvements, like countries that were not exporting that can export now because they produce, like in the case of Uzbekistan or the case of Venezuela because of the reduction of the sanctions, Guyana. So trying to find alternative, but they will be marginal improvements. The second is to reduce uncertainty, and that's where the Agricultural Market Information System, we're working with them to bring as much as information of the supplies today so that we don't create exacerbation. Because we know, for example, that a 1% increase in oil prices will be transmitted to 0.26% to the food import bill of a country if there is no uncertainty. But if there is uncertainty, the 1% becomes 0.67. So close to triple. So we need to minimize uncertainty today, because today we have enough food available. The problem is second half of the year and 2027. Third, to avoid export restrictions of energy and fertilizers. Fourth, to improve and start working on designing social protection systems with rosters that are updated to the problem. The problem today for the most vulnerable will be in rural areas. It will not be in urban areas like COVID-19. And we need to target those which will be most vulnerable. And fifth, to protect humanitarian response. One of the major challenges right now humanitarian response has is logistical cost, because they have increased. This is creating significant delays, and it's also increasing the last mile because it depends on the local diesel. And this has significant impacts. For example, delivery to Afghanistan from the Strait of Hormuz by WFP normally took around 1,400 kilometers. Now it's taking 4,000 and something kilometers. So significant cost in terms of that we need to look at. On the medium term, between 90 to 360 days, we're looking more at the ability of farmers, okay? And here we need to be careful because there are two policies, two types of subjects here. The formal farmers, which are medium, large, the agro-dealers, the agro-processors. For those, we can create systems like the ones we created during COVID-19 to create soft lines of credit for 24 to 36 months with a period of grace of 6 months and preferential rates, because we want to keep them alive. We don't want them to go in bankruptcy. The European Union, for example, has just launched with their fertilizer strategy this type of support, and we are looking at other options to support it. For the informal farmers, I think we need to look at this as an opportunity to formalize them, creating registries of farmers and trying to link them to farmer associations or to cooperatives or other types of horizontal coordination. At the country level, for the most vulnerable countries, mostly in Africa and some countries in South Asia, we are asking the financial organizations, the IFIs and the multilateral development banks, to develop facilities that will allow them to help them in their balance of payments, because their input import bill will increase and they are in debt stress, and the food import bill will later in the year increase. So we need to create those facilities. In 2022, the IMF created the food shock driven window, which was a result of the proposal of FAO of the food import financing facility. That food shock driven window accelerates help to this type of balance of payments. Today, the Asian Development Bank has created one, and African Development Bank right now is working on one that will help this process. Then the other problem is biofuels, because as you know, as the price of oil increases, when it crosses $100, like today is in 105, biofuels become profitable. And that put pressure on the demand of cereals, especially soybeans and oilseeds. And here we need to be careful, because this makes sense when you have surpluses of food. But when you have less supply of food, like what we could have at the end of the year or next year, it's important to moderate it, because if not, we will put more pressure on prices. On the long term, I think there is an opportunity to do three major things. First is we need to find a solution to strategically improve the capacity of absorption of these key inputs. And that means developing a system of strategic reserves and a storage around the different regions that will help us to have a buffer for around 6 months in case something happens. Today is the Strait of Hormuz. Tomorrow could be the Panama Canal because of El Nino, or it could be the Suez Canal or the Red Sea. So we need to be prepared for that. Second, we know that we have been very successful in the energy transition and in the diversification of the energy mix. And that's why today the impact on oil prices is 104 or 5 and it's not 140. But what, to our surprise, this transition has not percolated to the agri-food systems. So one of the major challenges we are observing is that farmers are not being able to irrigate because diesel has increased substantially in price. Just to give you an idea, the price of diesel has evolved in Latin America, increased 25%, in Europe 23%, in Asia 27%, and in Africa 16%. So we need to find a solution to that. So it's a great opportunity for banks to invest on converting pumping with diesel into pumping with solar panels, to bring electric tractors, electric drones, so to try to accelerate that energy transition also in the agri-food systems. And third, we need to innovate, and that means innovating in alternatives, and this is green ammonia, biofertilizers, and other innovations, but this will take time. Green ammonia is not cost effective right now, so it will take 3 to 4 years, but we need to create the resources to do that and create like funds that could create innovative funds that will be able to do that.
Obviously, getting all of that, all of those goals accomplished, it would be pretty ambitious, and like you said, require a lot of funding. How receptive do you think nations are, banks are to implement some of these things? Because obviously, this would address short-term and long-term problems, but at the same time, just getting the funding and the organization there just seems like it would be a massive challenge. How does that get done?
Of course, it's a challenge, but if you see the new policy of fertilizers of Europe, they're trying to incorporate many of the things we are saying. Now, what is the problem here and where we need to, because of course resources are scarce, but the situation we are moving, if things don't improve, could be pretty dramatic. And I am not talking yet of the potential simultaneous impact of El Nino and the depth of El Nino. But the way to think of this is a supply shock, okay? So if a country starts to put price controls or subsidies across the board to fertilizers or to energy, they will create a huge fiscal pressure and the money will be diluted extremely fast. And it will be regressive because it will benefit who? The ones who consume more of energy, which are the richer, and the ones who consume more fertilizers. So I think these monies should be used more efficiently. And that's why we are arguing the short term to better target to the most vulnerable rather than subsidizing everybody. And the same applies to the financing. You know, you want to use your central banks and you want to use your system, your financial system, to keep this agro industry alive, because if not, the cost will be higher tomorrow. No? So yes, there are important investments, but we have the tools, like the facilities. For example, the IMF has the capacity to do it. The regional banks also have the capacity to do it. So I think it's being receptive, but we need to accelerate. The question is, people are not yet feeling how serious this is, because in many of our countries, in OECD countries, prices are being controlled through subsidies, through other mechanisms. And it's simple to look at it. Look, the oil prices in the US, which are not controlled, has doubled, 50% increase. The oil prices in Europe are not double at all. So governments are already investment, and the IMF already came and said to Europe, you need to be careful because of the fiscal pressure. So people will start to feel this, will start to feel energy prices, will start to feel commodity price increase and food inflation, which we know is super risky. So I think we need to minimize those effects doing proper policies rather than to just dilute the money through subsidies that won't have the impact, will be regressive, and will not be helping the vulnerable, because at this we need to reduce the demand. Clearly, under a supply shock, for the ones that can pay, they need to consume less and pay higher prices. But for the ones that are vulnerable, we need to support.
Are you concerned that the countries may not be motivated to fully address this crisis until people really start feeling the pain? Because it sounds like, this is something, what you're saying we need to get ahead of and address now. But do you worry that people won't do that until?
Look, Asia is given the example. Look at what happened in India, the biggest populated country in the world. The prime minister said, work from home, study from home, don't use energy, diesel pumps, use electricity if possible, substitute chemical fertilizers to other types of alternatives, stop infrastructure investments, reduce gold purchases so that they have more liquidity, more devices available. So I think if a country of that size is already putting that type of measures, which also Philippines is doing, Sri Lanka is doing, Indonesia, I think we need to open our eyes. It's time to absorb the shock, to reduce the demand when we can, and to focus our resources, which are limited, as you said, to try to minimize that the most vulnerable fall into acute food insecurity and we create a bigger problem.
One thing I want to go back to that you mentioned a couple of times is the pending impact of El Nino. Tell me why the timing of that with this is so concerning to you right now.
No, because El Nino is going to start end of May until 2027. So if you have already planting with less fertilizers, less water, you are a lot more vulnerable to the impacts of El Nino. It will exacerbate the situation even more. Now, of course, in some cases, El Nino will be good. No, if you have more water when you need it, of course, it's good. But the typical case of this type of intensity of El Nino that they are predicting, which still is not sure, but the probability is pretty high, apparently the effects are always in net very negative. And if a key exporting country is impacted, then of course we will have a problem. Look, countries like Australia, you referred to Australia at the beginning, Australia has been facing significant droughts. Australia was mostly impacted because of diesel, because all their agri-food operations is diesel and they import fertilizers. What they are doing now is they are taking advantage of this season and producing a lot of legumes, which are less nitrogen, they don't need nitrogen. No, and they increase efficiency of fertilizers and focusing on livestock, which is what they export substantially. So I think countries are taking a lot of measures. Remember when there was this speech after speech of Donald Trump, then the Prime Minister of the UK, the Prime Minister of Australia, all of them were announcing significant measures because of this. So right now we have around 600 measures in the world. The problem is, and where we are concerned is, most of them are related to fiscal stress.
Of course they are. Last thing I wanted to ask you is, but going back to the Strait of Hormuz, best case scenario, somehow this gets resolved, shipping resumes, in the short, within a matter of days or weeks. How long will it take the global ag economy to get back to normal? I mean, we're probably talking years now, right?
Yeah, because of the damage on infrastructure. No? Now, I think the most important thing that will happen will be that price of energy will fall. And that's super important because for governments, reduce the pressure over the urban population and also help for agriculture when diesel is being used. The fertilizer story depends on the crop calendar. So now we are talking of 2027, basically. So I think it's important to understand that the impact will take now more than a year. The issue here, if it opens tomorrow, is not the issue of we go back to what we were before. No, that won't happen anymore. The issue is how intense and deep is this impact, and how much we can minimize the impact so that we can focus on climate and we can focus on El Nino.
Well, I think that's about all the time we have here. I want to thank Maximo Torero again for being on here today. You can learn more about the work he and the team at the group at FAO is doing at FAO.org, I believe. That's the correct address, I believe. I also want to thank our producer, Hans-Jörg Geiger, for putting this all together. If you want to read more about agriculture policy, you can find my work at farmprogress.com. Until next time, this has been the Ag Policy Podcast. I'm Josh Baethge. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Thank you.